Have you ever stopped to think about why some people seem to carry the world on their shoulders even though they are so young? Mike Wheeler is exactly like that. At first glance, he may seem just like the smart and loyal kid from Stranger Things. But behind that smile and unconditional friendship, there is a storm of fears, insecurities, and choices that shape every step he takes. And what if I told you that much of what he experiences is a reflection of silent traumas that you might not even notice in your own life? Today, we are going to dive into Mike's mind and discover how courage, guilt, and the pressure of being the protector shape every decision he makes, and perhaps, without realizing it, yours too. If you are a fan of cinema psychology and want to understand the mind behind your favorite character, subscribe to the channel now so you do not miss any video. But first, comment below which character you want me to analyze here on the channel. Now let's go to the video. Mike Wheeler always seemed like that kid everyone knows. Kind of nerdy, kind of dreamy, kind of stubborn, and 100% loyal to what he believes in. He does not arrive making noise, but just observing a little. You can notice that there is an emotional volcano disguised as a skinny teenager. He grows up in a house with silent rules, quick glances, and conversations that almost never go deep. And it is in this environment that he learns to survive by trying. To be the nice guy, even when inside he is carrying a world that is a little too confusing. And when we think of Mike at the beginning with his RPG games and that sparkle in his eyes, imagining impossible worlds, you can feel how his imagination has always been a kind of refuge. Like many people who grow up feeling more than they say, Mike uses fantasy as shelter. Only that, in his case, when life begins to get too real, this shelter becomes a shield. And who has never hidden a little behind something that seems safer than the real world? Since he was little, Mike has always been the type of person who tries to solve everything his way, which is usually guided much more by emotion than by logic. And that creates charm, of course, but it also creates internal mazes that he himself sometimes does not realize he built. It is that energy of, I can handle it, even when clearly he cannot. And it is funny how this pattern appears in so many people who try to be the emotional glue of a group. His relationship with his friends reveals a lot about how he sees himself. Mike is the one who assumes the role of leader almost without thinking, as if someone had pushed this title on him and he just accepted it not to disappoint anyone. It is the kind of dynamic I have seen many times in my office. The teenager who thinks he needs to be the adult version of himself to protect the world around him. In practice, this makes him grow up too fast in some things and completely freeze in others. When 11 enters his life, everything intensifies. Mike clings to the idea of protecting someone because, for the first time, he feels that someone truly needs him. And this moves his heart in such a deep way that he does not even know where to start understanding it. After all, being needed is different from being loved, right? And maybe he does not even notice this difference yet, but it will appear, and strongly, in the next chapters of his story. He also carries that somewhat impulsive way, which seems nice at first, but actually hides a constant urgency to prove something to himself. The urgency to be useful, to be important, to be the guy who solves things. And it is curious how many people grow up exactly like this, believing that value comes from what they do and not from what they are. Mike lives this without realizing that he is emotionally draining himself in the process. Deep down, Mike is that teenager who lives a silent conflict between who he believes he needs to be and who he really is. He tries to be brave like an RPG hero, but feels small most of the time, and there is nothing more human than that. Perhaps that is why so many people see themselves in him even without realizing it. You can feel it when someone carries a heart that wants to do the right thing, even without knowing exactly what the right thing is. And all this only prepares the ground for something even deeper, because when these internal worlds start to collide, the truth appears, and the truth for him is not simple. It is emotional, messy, full of expectations and fears he has never spoken aloud. And it is precisely at this point that we enter the next topic, where his traumas begin to appear more clearly. The role of leader that was never chosen from an early age. Mike assumed the role of leader as if it were automatic, almost a reflex. Only nobody ever asked if he wanted to be this leader or if he was ready to carry the emotions of the whole group on his shoulders. It is that classic case of someone who becomes a reference simply because they feel too much and do not know how to. Turn off this emotional radar, and this, despite seeming nice ways, it weighs a lot. He is the type of kid who, at the slightest sign of chaos, tries to organize everything, protect everyone, and ensure that nobody collapses. Only deep down, he is the one who most fears collapsing, and it is in this paradox that a silent trauma lives. The fear of disappointing others, this fear creates constant tension in him, as if every choice were a test. And of course, nobody sees this effort behind the confident posture. In my office, I have already seen this in several teenagers. The one who becomes the spokesperson of the group, the resolver of fights, the involuntary mediator. At first, it seems just maturity. Later, it turns into exhaustion. And with Mike, it is the same. He thinks that if he fails even once, everything will collapse. This feeling of I cannot break is one of the most dangerous for emotional health, because nobody can hold the world alone. The most curious thing is how this role creates a kind of emotional self-censorship. Mike begins to hide what he feels to avoid worrying anyone. He swallows fear, anger, sadness. If you watch closely, you can see how he is always trying to maintain a bit of control, as if any sincere display of fragility were an invitation to chaos. And it is here that he begins to lose himself without noticing. When 11, Will or any friend goes through something difficult, he runs first, thinks later. It is instinctive, but the problem is that instinct does not solve internal trauma. He is always in survival mode, thinking he needs to be the first to sacrifice himself emotionally for everything to work out. And this creates a cruel internal narrative that love only exists if he proves useful all the time. And perhaps you have already felt this in practice. That moment when everyone sees you as strong, but inside you just wish someone would notice the opposite. With Mike, this appears so clearly that it is painful to watch. He wants to be understood, but rarely says what he really feels. Because again, leaders cannot fail. That is the mantra he repeats without realizing it. This trauma ends up shaping his self-esteem because he starts to measure his value by his ability to keep the group together. If Will suffers, he thinks he failed. If 11 isolates herself, he thinks he was not good enough. It is an unfair emotional math, but extremely common among sensitive teenagers. And this constant pressure creates internal cracks that become increasingly visible throughout the series. And here comes the cruelest detail. When you grow up believing that you need to protect everyone, you end up forgetting who protects you, and Mike feels this more than he admits. And this lack of a safe emotional space opens the door to the next trauma, which hits him in an even deeper way. Affective insecurity and the fear of not being loved. Mike's affective insecurity has always been there, quietly, waiting for the right moment to appear. He is the type of kid who loves intensely but fears with the same force. And loving this way is almost like walking on an emotional tightrope. 1 step forward, 2 steps back while trying to guess what the other person feels. In Mike's case, this fear of not being loved invades every gesture, every silence, and even what he does not know how to say. With 11, this insecurity becomes even more evident. He feels that he needs to deserve her love all the time, as if he were being evaluated in every move. And when you believe you need to be perfect not to lose someone, you already know. There is no room for vulnerability. That is why he freezes so much when trying to say, "I love you," as if those words were testing his value. And this leaves marks. At the same time, there is a deep connection with Will, which awakens in him a totally different, almost raw feeling. With Will, Mike does not need to perform. He does not need to be the leader, nor the hero, nor the perfect boyfriend. And this naturalness, as incredible as it seems, scares him. Because when the connection is real, honest, effortless, it exposes everything he tries to hide. And Mike does not know how to deal with this transparency. This dynamic creates a huge internal conflict. He feels affection from both sides, but in ways he still does not understand. And, in his mind, liking more than one person means he is wrong about something. It is as if he were afraid of being inconsistent, when in reality, he is just discovering who he is. This happens a lot with sensitive teenagers. They think feeling too much is a flaw, when in fact it is just humanity pulsating. Moreover, Mike carries that constant anxiety of being emotionally abandoned. When someone distances themselves, he automatically thinks he did something wrong. Who has never experienced this, right? This tendency to assume guilt in everything is typical of those who grew up trying to maintain love through effort rather than security. And, of course, this totally affects how he relates to Eleven and Will, and that is why he reacts so badly when he notices any sign of distance. With Eleven, he keeps insisting, explaining, starting conversations, trying to understand what is happening. With Will, he becomes confused, worried, trying to decipher that silence full of feelings. He thinks he is losing both at the same time, and this fear paralyzes. Because his mind cannot imagine being worthy of love without having to prove himself in many moments, you can see that Mike just wanted someone to say, "It is okay that you do not have all the answers," but he never had this space at home, and ends up replicating it in relationships. He tries to fill every silence with action, every doubt with control, every insecurity with a promise. But his heart remains there, hesitating, testing every gesture of life to see if he is safe. And this fear of not being loved, of being replaced, of not being enough, pushes Mike in an emotional direction he has not yet realized. But it is precisely here that the next trauma is born, even deeper, which explains so much of the way he feels and hides. The feeling of not fitting in and the conflict with his own identity, the feeling of inadequacy, has always haunted Mike, even when he tries to hide it behind elaborate plans and statements full of conviction. He lives with that eternal doubt about who he is and who he should be, as if he were outside his own body trying to guess the instruction manual. This creates a kind of internal noise, that quiet voice that says you are wrong, even when he is doing the best he can. And of course, this voice never truly shuts up. He constantly adapts to others, as if trying to fit into boxes that were not made for him. With 11, he tries to be strong. With the group, he tries to be a leader. With his family, he tries to be the okay son, but nowhere does he find a version of himself that seems complete. And this attempt to be everything for everyone is exactly what empties who he truly is. It is like when you try to please everyone, and in the end, no one really sees you. There is also that silent conflict about growing differently from boys his age. While his friends begin to explore relationships, interests, and different paths, Mike remains stuck in a strange feeling of, am I behind? Many people go through this in adolescence, that fear of living in a wrong way, and when you combine this with his emotions, it becomes an emotional time bomb. His gaze always reveals more than words. You can see that there is something inside trying to emerge, something he still does not know how to name. Identity is a delicate terrain, especially when someone feels that any movement can change the relationships around them. Mike is afraid of causing impact, afraid of disappointing, afraid of discovering a truth that changes everything. And this hesitation creates an emotional knot that is hard to untangle. He also carries that discomfort of feeling that he is not good enough at anything specific. His friends have clear abilities. 11 has powers, Dustin has brilliance, Lucas has confidence. Will has artistic sensitivity, and he feels that he is just there trying to keep up. This creates a deep insecurity, the kind that makes a person look in the mirror and think, why am I not more? It is a cruel thought, but very common. And this feeling of inadequacy intensifies when he realizes that his emotions do not fit the expectations of others. He feels too much, talks too much, acts too much, and sometimes this makes him believe that there is something wrong with the way he feels. It is almost as if he is constantly apologizing for existing, and this, over time, wears down even the courage to express himself. This internal conflict becomes an emotional labyrinth. He wants to find himself, but fears what he will find. He wants to be authentic, but fears being rejected. He wants to connect, but fears exposing too much. It is that silent fight between what he feels and what he thinks he should feel. And this type of internal battle does not end easily. It grows, taking more space, influencing every decision and every gesture he makes. And as this feeling of not fitting in increases, other aspects of his personality begin to solidify in unexpected ways. It is here that his choices start to gain new layers, and this paves the way for the next topic, where everything he has experienced begins to shape who he becomes. All these traumas make Mike grow with a sensitivity that seems at the same time a superpower and a curse. He feels the world intensely, as if every detail has a hidden meaning. This shapes a deeply empathetic personality, but also hyper-alert, always expecting the next sign of emotional danger, and that is why he reacts so quickly, even when no one asked. He already lives defensively, trying to avoid the next pain. This mixture of insecurity and responsibility makes him someone who tries to be the constant support for others, but never his own support. He believes he needs to be an anchor, even when he is drowning inside. His personality develops from this constant effort to prove value, as if love were something he had to earn daily. And this creates a specific way of living, always doing more than necessary, always feeling more than he should. He also becomes extremely loyal, sometimes even too much. Mike does not abandon anyone, not when he is tired, not when he is confused, not when he is broken. This loyalty comes from the fear of being abandoned, of course, but also from a romantic view of what friendship and love are. For him, a relationship is a sacred mission, and when someone has this type of view, they end up tolerating things they might not always should, just to avoid feeling alone. His personality also gains traits of emotional impulsivity. Mike does not wait long to act. He speaks what he feels, runs to where he thinks he needs to be, and gets involved to the last bit of energy. This is beautiful because it shows courage, but it is also dangerous because he lives reacting to the world instead of reflecting on it. It is the classic response of someone who grew up thinking that if they do not act quickly, they lose everything. Another thing that arises from these traumas is an exaggerated sense of purpose. Mike thinks he has to save the world all the time. He places this enormous responsibility on himself as if he were the only one who can prevent chaos. And this, besides being exhausting, takes from him the lightness of simply existing. It is as if he had forgotten that he is still a kid trying to find his own place in the world. These conflicts also shape a huge difficulty in expressing real feelings. He talks about plans, strategies, dangers, but when it comes to what he feels, he freezes. It is as if there is an emotional lock inside him, preventing him from truly opening up. It is that kind of difficulty many adults have. But in Mike, it appears in a raw and transparent way. He wants to speak, but fears what words might cause. On the other hand, Mike develops a rare sensitivity to notice when something is wrong with those he loves. He may not understand what is happening to himself, but he recognizes the suffering of others as if it were his own. And this ability is a direct result of his traumas. Those who have suffered a lot learn to read pain in the eyes of others. It is one of the most beautiful and heaviest aspects of his personality. And as all this strengthens within him, what once seemed like mere insecurity starts to transform into motivation, decisions, and ways of living. He begins to act not only based on what he feels, but also on the fear of what he might lose. And it is precisely this that opens the door to the next topic, where these choices begin to define the path of his life. Mike's choices always seem impulsive, but when you look deeper, you can see that each decision he makes is born from the fears and expectations he carries. He does not choose the most logical path, he chooses the path that seems to protect those he loves. It is as if every situation were a chance to avoid old pains. And honestly, this is typical of someone who grew up trying not to repeat wounds they never knew how to heal. That is why he throws himself into danger without a second thought. It is not pure courage, it is an emotional necessity. He believes that if he does not act now, someone he cares about could get hurt. This urgency comes from that trauma of being the responsible one for keeping everything standing. You can see it every time he faces monsters, authorities, or even his own friends. He fears what happens if he hesitates. When it comes to love, his choices are also guided more by fear than clarity. He becomes trapped between not saying what he feels and saying it at the wrong time, because he is always trying not to lose those he loves. This explains why he insists so much with 11, even when she distances herself, or why he treats Will with such specific delicacy. He is always trying to balance relationships that seem one step away from collapsing. And in difficult moments when the group fragments, Mike becomes the one who tries to glue everything together quickly. But deep down, this behavior comes from the trauma of emotional abandonment. He is not just trying to unite the group. He is trying to preserve the only place where he feels he belongs. And this motivation changes everything because it makes him decide with his heart before logic. Even his fights reveal this. When he explodes, it is not out of pure anger, but fear. Fear of losing, fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough. In practice, I see this all the time. People expressing anxiety as if it were irritation. And with Mike, this happens exactly the same way. He speaks loudly because his heart is screaming even louder. His choices also show a continuous search for identity. He supports some friends intensely, distances himself from others due to confusion, dives headfirst into situations that seem heroic, but are actually attempts to see himself in a positive way. It is almost as if every choice were an internal test to discover who he really is. He also has the habit of prioritizing others to the point of neglecting himself. This appears whenever he gives up his own feelings to maintain peace, or when he tries to be the bridge between Eleven and the group, or between Will and the rest. Mike always chooses to be in the middle, even when it weighs on him. Only those who grew up carrying everything on their shoulders know how hard it is to let go of that role. And as these choices keep repeating, he begins to follow a path where the consequences become increasingly serious. Because no trauma stays quiet forever, and his decisions start reflecting exactly what he most fears and most desires. And that is why the next topic reveals an even deeper transformation in him. Mike's emotional evolution throughout the series. Mike's emotional evolution is slow, somewhat crooked, but deeply human. He begins as a boy who acts before thinking and ends as someone who gradually starts seeing himself more honestly. It is beautiful to see how he tries, even when he makes mistakes. He gradually replaces that blind impulsiveness with more conscious courage, as if finally understanding that feeling too much is not a problem, but an invitation to know oneself better. With 11, he learns that love cannot be sustained solely by the desire to protect the other person. Gradually, he realizes he needs to listen, give space, and allow her to grow without feeling like he is abandoning anyone. And this becomes a huge challenge because it opens the door to a new question. Who is Mike outside the role of protector? Each season gives a clue to this answer, but the most interesting part is that even he does not fully know where this journey is going. With Will, his evolution is even more delicate. He begins by seeing his friend as fragile, someone who needs constant care. But as they both mature, Mike realizes that it is not only Will who needs support, but both of them. This more balanced exchange starts to emerge timidly, but it is real. It is almost like watching two souls trying to find each other amidst all the emotional chaos life has thrown at them. His relationship with the group also changes significantly. At first, he is the leader who carries the guilt of everything. Later, he learns to share responsibilities, accept help, and admit when he does not know what to do. This growth seems simple, but it is huge for someone who always believed the world would collapse if he did not take the lead. He discovers that strength is not synonymous with control. Another important change is how he begins to deal with his own emotions. The Mike from the beginning hides everything, represses everything, holds everything in. The Mike from the last seasons, even if confused, begins to speak more, open up more, even if awkwardly. It is as if he is finally realizing that vulnerability is not weakness, and that saying what you feel does not destroy anyone. In reality, it brings people closer. The most interesting part is seeing how he begins to question who he really is. The traumas that once defined his personality start turning into internal questions, like, am I still the boy who tries to save everyone? Or do I deserve to be loved without having to prove myself? And when these doubts arise, a new strength also emerges, the strength of awareness. His maturity shows especially in moments when he must choose between acting out of fear or acting out of truth. In the first seasons, he almost always chooses fear. In the later ones, he begins to choose truth even when it hurts. This is a clear sign of emotional evolution. It is not fast. It is not perfect, but it is real, and that is exactly what makes so many people identify with him. And as he allows himself to be who he truly is, something within him begins to change irreversibly. It is as if each part of the story has been preparing him for a turning point that has not fully arrived yet, but is there, emerging. And this opens the door to the final topic, where this transformation begins to point toward the future. Mike's emotional rebirth begins when he finally realizes that he no longer needs to live to fulfill a role. Everything that once defined his identity begins to crumble, not as ruin, but as liberation. It is when he realizes he can choose who he wants to be and not just react to what the world demands of him. This awakening is subtle but transformative, as if a light turns on inside him for the first time. He begins to see his own emotions more honestly. Instead of running away, he faces them. Instead of hiding behind bravado, he accepts that feeling is intense, confusing, and necessary. This new posture opens doors to conversations he previously froze over out of fear, and it is precisely in this space that he begins to build more genuine relationships, where vulnerability becomes a bridge, not a threat. With 11, this rebirth manifests as maturation. He understands that loving is allowing the other to grow, even if it changes everything. He stops trying to be the hero who saves and becomes someone who supports, who shares the weight, who is there not to control, but to walk alongside. It is an emotional turning point that takes him from fantasy into the terrain of emotional reality. With Will, the change is even deeper. He realizes that their connection was never just nostalgia or guilt, but a true emotional bond, which strengthens when there is space for sincerity. And as Mike is reborn, he begins to see Will not as someone he needs to protect, but as someone he genuinely wants to understand. This changes the entire dynamic, opening space for conversations that were previously avoided for fear of what they might reveal. The group also feels this transformation. Mike stops being the impulsive leader who carries the world on his shoulders and becomes someone who knows when to act, when to listen, and when to trust others. This balance comes from the maturity of understanding that no one grows alone, and even though he still has the impulse to take everything on, he begins to recognize that sharing the weight makes the journey lighter. The greatest mark of this rebirth is emotional courage, not the physical courage to face monsters, but the courage to face oneself, to admit that he was wrong, that he got lost, that he also needs care. It is this kind of courage that defines the next phases of his life. A courage that does not shout but sustains, that does not impose but remains. And as he rebuilds himself, something new begins to emerge, the possibility of a more authentic future, a future where he does not need to be the boy who carries the guilt, nor the friend who saves everyone, nor the boyfriend who tries to meet unattainable expectations. He can simply be Mike, and this, for the first time, seems enough. This rebirth does not deliver ready-made answers, but it opens the space for him to finally write his own story. His journey ceases to be defined by trauma and begins to be guided by awareness. No matter what comes next, he is no longer a hostage of what he was. And that changes absolutely everything. You know, after diving so deeply into Mike's mind, it is even hard not to look at our own lives and think about where we are also running away, holding on too tightly, or trying to be everyone's hero. And I want to know from you, what struck you the most in this video? Which part resonated most deeply inside you? Tell me, because it really helps to understand what truly touches you. And while you are at it, tell me which character you want to see here on the channel in the next psychological analysis. It can be crazy, unexpected, someone you hold in your heart, or someone you still do not understand. And of course, if you enjoyed this entire dive, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way you keep learning, understanding yourself, and, who knows, finding yourself in the characters as well.